So I have a friend who has two sons, and they live in a small southern city. About 10 years ago, his wife got really sick. She had cancer, and people started coming by to pray for her. She was a writer in the community. Everyone knew her. He was a prominent Christian leader. Everyone knew him. And it seemed like almost every day, someone from their church or the community would come and pray for her. But after about 2 years, she passed away. And my friend says his sons were very angry with God. They said that everyone had promised that God would heal her, and now their mother is gone. They're like 19, 20, 21 years old. And then about 2-3 years later, he met someone else, and my friend got remarried, but the sons didn't like this because she had 2 little kids of her own, and now they didn't feel like they had a home, and she wasn't their mother. And so now not only were they angry with God, they were unhappy with their father. And so they both decided to move away from this small southern town and go as far away as they could. One went to Boston, one went to New York City. One worked as a bartender, another as a musician. And they quit calling their father. They said, "We really don't want anything to do with you." And that went on for a while. But the father couldn't take the distance. And even though they refused to come home, especially after he moved, they said, "We're not coming home. It's not our home anymore." He decided he would go to them. And so he would just show up in the places where they worked or show up in their apartment and sleep on the couch. And they were always glad to see him. And he kept doing this and kept doing this until this Christmas, for the first time, they came home and their whole family was together. You see, their father was a reconciling father. And you have a father in heaven like that. We started this series titled Kingdom Living. Going through the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus is laying out these kingdom values. And he says this, he says, you live in a reconciling kingdom. Of all the things he wants you to get, he wants you to understand that you are a citizen of a reconciling kingdom. So open your Bibles and let's read about what Jesus says to us about reconciling with others, because our Father in heaven has already reconciled with us. Chapter 5, verse 21. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, "You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment." But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or a sister will be subject to judgment. Therefore, if you're offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or your sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, and then come and offer your gift. Do you get the picture? He says, let's say you show up at your place of worship at the Grove and you realize your relationship with somebody is a mess. He says, go get that right and then come and worship. Jesus does something pretty stunning here. He draws a straight line between our relationships and how healthy they are, and the quality of our spirituality. In other words, you can't have a great relationship with God, you can't worship, you can't know Him, if you're leaving a trail of broken and hurt people behind you. So how you live towards other people, Monday through Friday, Jesus says, how you treat people has a direct influence and impact on your spirituality. So go and make things right if there's people that have been hurt by you. So reconcile. Let's go back. I want to read this passage again from the Message Bible. First, I have this key idea, and take this thought home with you. I have the kingdom of heaven spreads relationally. How we live towards others has spiritual implications. So if you have any hope of growing spiritually and expanding God's kingdom of heaven on earth, Jesus says, go and get your relationships right. So let me read this passage again. Verse 22, if you enter your place of worship and you're about to make an offering and you suddenly remember a grudge a friend has against you, abandon your offering, leave immediately, go to this friend and make things right. Then and only then come back and work things out with God. Don't lose a minute. Make the first move. Make things right. Verse 24, he says, go and be reconciled. I think Jesus knew our tendency to get sideways with people. All of us, at some point, maybe even right now, some of you, or at least a person sitting next to you, you're we have people in our life that we just don't get along with, and the relationship is broken. It's just our human tendency. And Jesus tries to raise this value that in his kingdom, reconciling and forgiving is so much better than anger and unforgiveness. Our human tendency, let's be honest, is to get angry and to retaliate and to treat them poorly in return. We don't want to forgive. We're not wired that way. That's the really hard thing that he's calling us to hold a grudge. But here's the thing about anger. When you lose your temper, you will lose your reputation. You want to lose your job quickly, just keep getting mad at people. But you probably know these people in your office. They're known for getting angry, being contentious, being difficult to deal with. And Jesus says, in my kingdom, you are an apostle of peace. You are a person who reconciles. You're a person who forgives. But when you lose your temper, when you get angry, people will know you for that. Your reputation will go right with it. I know this because I'm always at risk too. I'm human, and I'm tempted to get angry all the time. It could have been yesterday, but I'll tell you about what happened 2 weeks ago. I was at Sky Harbor, and my parents were flying in from Africa, and I hadn't seen them for almost a year. And they've been traveling like 30 hours, and so I'm in the lobby, and I see them coming down the ramp, and just at the entrance to the ramp is the TSA desk, and there's 2 TSA agents there, and there's a big sign that says, "Do not enter," right? So as they're coming past that checkpoint, or whatever you want to call it, I start to go towards them to give them a hand. "Hey, Mom and Dad." And just as I'm walking toward them, someone yells, "Get back." And I was like, well, he can't be talking to me. I'm still in the lobby, so I keep walking toward them. And this person yells, "Get back now." And I was like, and I see the person in a blue shirt. We won't say who they work for. Anyway, so the person in the blue shirt's yelling at me. And I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "You're in a secure area." And he's, "Yeah, so get back now." And it's like, I'm not getting back. And I'm about to tell him what I know about security and everything he doesn't know. And just give him, because I can't believe he's yelling at me in public. And right when I'm about to speak, all of a sudden I hear there's passengers walking by me, and one of them says, "Good afternoon, Pastor." It's like, oh, who's, someone from the Grove is right here, and I'm about to lose it. And it was just the Holy Spirit. I didn't know who it was till the last service, and they came and told me that was me. And so I just had to swallow my words. I was like, oh, I can't ruin my reputation now. I thought I was anonymous. So I just hugged my mom and dad and let it go. But Jesus says that's how we have to live every day towards everyone. You live in a reconciling kingdom, don't you? Jesus used to tell reconciling stories. In Matthew chapter 18, Peter makes this generous offer. He says, "How many times do I need to forgive someone, reconcile with someone?" He says, 7 times? He thinks that's a lot. And Jesus says, no. How about 7 times 70? Which for the Jewish people, that formula represents an infinite number of times. What a lot of people don't know is Jesus is reaching back and referring to the law of Lamech. In Genesis chapter 4, there's a man named Lamech. And Lamech says, we read this in Genesis 4, he says, "A man wounded me, so I killed him." He says, "Another man hurt me with his words, so I killed him." He says, "I'll get revenge 7 times 70, an infinite number of times." So Jesus comes back and he flips the formula. He says, no, it's not Moses' law, an eye for an eye. He said, instead, forgive, reconcile, an infinite number of times. That's not so satisfying, is it? But the only thing that can heal a ruined relationship is to reconcile. And the only force in the universe that is strong enough to help us reconcile is the power of God in you. And I'm just going to tell you right now that as a follower of Jesus Christ, you are called to initiate the reconciling every time. It's always your move, no matter who's wrong. And the thing is, you should be really good at reconciling because you live in a reconciling kingdom. You're citizens in that kind of kingdom. And you all know that Jesus Christ, what he's done on the cross to forgive you and make you right to God, and he's reconciled you for all the wrongs in your life. And he simply says, now turn around and live that way towards others. Here's what reconciling does. Reconciling says, you are too important to me in order for me to let this stay between us, in order for me to hold a grudge. Our relationship is more valuable to me than being right. In Matthew chapter 6, so in the same Sermon on the Mount, verse 12, Jesus starts to teach us how to pray. And here's how he says. He says, forgive us our debts. We have it on the screen. As we also forgive our debtors. We have this word in red and bold, the little short word as, because it's one of the scariest, toughest, biggest, hairiest words in the Bible, that as God forgives you, Jesus says, at the same time, forgive others. He goes on in verse 14, because if you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. To forgive someone, now understand this, it doesn't mean that you have forgotten the wrong or that you're condoning their behavior. It doesn't mean that you're tolerating something that is wrong. It simply means that you are choosing the way of love. And that you understand that Jesus' way of love and reconciling is so much better than the way of retaliating and bitterness and hate. The way of love is painful. It's really hard. I remember a number of years ago when our church was still meeting in a school gym, and we're planning the Christmas services, and one guy was just volunteering, helping with the whole thing, and he had an idea, and when we were meeting, I told him it was a really bad idea, but the way I did it, when I got home, I realized I offended him. Just the way I spoke to him. And maybe he didn't even know it. But in my heart, I knew I had offended him. I knew the way I spoke to him wasn't right, just about an idea. And so I got on the phone and I called him and I said, I'm sorry. Maybe that's not so hard. But then he said, no problem. Then I said this. I said, would you forgive me? And he said, of course. But you see, it's always our move. It's one of the hardest things that we'll do. We don't want to do it, but it's the only way to make a relationship right. Here's the thing, in your life, maybe right now, you're thinking about a conflict that you've had with someone. You're thinking about a ruined relationship. I want to remind you this morning that it's never too late to reconcile. Maybe it's been months or weeks, maybe it's been years or even decades. I want to say it's never too late, and it's your move. Some people will say, well, I don't need to forgive them. I don't need to reconcile because time heals everything. And I'm going to say, no, they're wrong about that. Time heals nothing until you make the move and you reconcile. So Jesus says, don't forget, you live in a reconciling kingdom. And here's his next thought. One of the reasons that we end up needing to reconcile with someone else is because we've broken their trust. And so Jesus says next, as a person in my kingdom, in your relationships, build trust. And he says two simple things here, two short lines. He says in verse 33, don't say anything you don't mean. I love that line. Verse 37, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Our conflict with other people is often a result of broken trust. You said something and then you didn't do it. Or you broke their confidence and you ruined the relationship. Reconciling, a huge part of reconciling with someone, it could be a husband or a wife, it could be a friend, it could be someone you work with, is to rebuild trust. But you know the people who you can't trust. And my encouragement this morning is to become a person of so much integrity that everyone knows they can trust you. But you have people in your life, some of them you probably work with them, who they tell half-truths, they twist the truth, they take your words and they twist them against you. In fact, I'm going to use as an example a whole category of people that do this. They're called high schoolers. All right, just some of them sometimes, just some of them at some time. But I know this is partially true because I used to be a high school pastor in California years ago. And I took a group of high schoolers we were in LA, in the LA area in La Mirada, and I took a big group down to San Diego. and we're staying on Imperial Beach. We're camping on the sand. It was killer. And then Saturday morning, two of the guys, I still remember their names, Kevin and Adam. And they say, hey, can we go down to the 7-Eleven? And I was like, sure, it's just like a block away. And so Kevin and Adam leave, and it's like lunchtime. They're not back. And I was like, well, that's kind of odd. The 7-Eleven's right there. We go back in the water. We're swimming. And now I'm starting to think, where are Kevin and Adam? I'm slightly concerned, just a little bit concerned about them, that they've been gone for about 6 hours. Not really concerned. But I'm asking around, and no one else knows where Kevin and Adam are. Now it's getting dark. It's like 6. The sun is setting. We're together for dinner. I'm really wondering, where are Kevin and Adam? I need to find them now. And then I see them walking my way, and down the street towards where we are. And I see that they're wearing sombreros and ponchos. And I said, Kevin, Adam, where have you guys been? Where have you been all day? They said, we've been in Tijuana. I said, you crossed the border and went to Tijuana. I said, what made you think you could go to Tijuana? And they said, you said we could. I said, what? I said, I never said you said you could go to Tijuana. They said, you said we could go to the 7-Eleven. And you didn't say we couldn't go to Tijuana. I was like, lying. So I just called their mom and dad, come get your lying sons right now. Some people you just can't trust. And Jesus is saying, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Trust matters deeply in your relationships. Whether it's in your marriage, whether it's in your friendships, especially in business. When you tell people something, you better keep your word. Trust is irreplaceable when it comes to your reputation. There are some people that say things like this: I don't have to trust them, I just have to work with them. And I would say back to you, why in the world would you want to work with someone who you can't trust? So if you lead a team, if you manage, or if you're in any position of influence, then build a team that values trust. If there's someone that you can't trust on your team, then start to develop it. And if they can't be trusted, you know what? You're going to have to find someone else to work in their place, because that's not going to work out. Every great leader knows that their leadership hinges on whether they can be trusted or not. Every company knows that their reputation, whether they can be trusted or not, is at stake. Trust is at the core of every great leader. In our relationships, trust is invaluable too, whether it's in your marriage or in your family. Here's what they say about marriages and anyone that you're in love with. You cannot love someone if you don't trust them. Trust and love go together, because you can't open up your heart to someone if you can't completely trust them. If you have had someone break your confidence, or maybe you have broken their confidence and lost their trust, or maybe you have done something that you need to rebuild trust. I have a few thoughts here, because you can break someone's trust and lose it in just a heartbeat, and then it takes time to build it back. I have here, communicate more, talk more, let them know what you're doing, what you're planning. Keep your word. If you give someone your word, keep it. If you're in sales and you told someone that you're going to deliver something on time and it might be late, then load all the nuts and bolts in your car, whatever you sold them, and drive it over there in your Prius, whatever you have to do. Be transparent. People who hide things can't be trusted. And so with the people who are in your circle of friendships, so the people that you love, the people that you care about, be transparent with them. Build trust. So Jesus says this is imperative in my kingdom. And then he says this about our relationships. He says, go the extra mile. We read in verse 38. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the left cheek as well. Move on down. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, then go with them 2 miles. We now call this going the extra mile. You know, Jesus said this 2,000 years ago, and today Harvard business professors are talking about going the extra mile. Yale economists are advising companies and saying, teach your sales force, teach your people to go the extra mile. Now it's a proven business principle, and it all started with Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago saying, go the extra mile. What does going the extra mile mean in your life? It means that it's part of who you are. When you get up in the morning, it's part of who you are every day. You do the extra things, whether it's for a customer or whether it's for a family member or whether it's for a neighbor, that you're known as going the extra mile. Here's what business experts say about going the extra mile, that it's the difference between being average and being at the top of your field and being the best and being the most respected. It's going the extra mile. Customers, they say, will never forget when you go the extra mile. I know this because I've seen it. In fact, customers will become your branding experts for you and branding promoters for you when you go the extra mile. I watched this happen when we lived, before moving to Chandler, Veronica and I lived in Lilongwe, Malawi with our 4 sons. And there was one woman who lived in a town called Salima. And every day she drove over an hour to get her daughter to school over these really bumpy, rough, rocky Malawian roads, sometimes in the rainy season full of mud. And she just had a hard time getting to Lilongwe and back every day. And so Land Rover came out with a brand new car called a Freelander. And so she bought one, a brand new Freelander. And she starts driving her daughter to school in it. The first month she owns it, she cracks the axle and breaks it. So she calls Land Rover. She said, the axle broke. Can you help me? They said, sure, we'll send another axle down and you get it fixed somewhere and we'll pay the cost. She said, great. So they send the axle, they make the repair. She starts driving her daughter to school and back again. A month later, I'm not making this up, she breaks the axle a second time. And she calls Land Rover. She says, hey, the axle broke again. Can you help me out? They said, sure, we're sending an axle, get it fixed, we'll pay the cost. But then they said, but this time we're going to send down 2 engineers from London. And we want to ask if you could let them ride with you on your way to school and back. And sure enough, these 2 engineers showed up, and for a week they got in her Freelander and drove over these roads, and they're getting beat up in the back seat and seeing what's breaking the axles of these Land Rovers. And they go back to England and they redesign the suspension and build a stronger axle. And then you know what Land Rover did? They sent her a brand new Freelander. And now everyone in Lilongwe wants a Freelander. Everybody wants to buy a Freelander because they stand behind their product. They go the extra mile. They go thousands of extra miles. Who does that? Can I just remind you that people know you for your reputation and how you treat them. Going the extra mile is a dignity and respect thing. That you just don't treat the people with large accounts well. You just don't treat your influential friends well. You treat everyone well. That's going the extra mile. You not only care about people, but you serve them. Do you have friends? I think we all have friends that we know deeply care about us and some friends that really doesn't show much. My wife, Veronica, has a friend who I know goes the extra mile, not just for her, but anyone who's her friend. Here's what she does. If you're going through something really difficult, she makes homemade chili. So like 2 years ago, Veronica has a car accident, and this friend makes her homemade chili. I don't know what homemade chili has to do with a car accident, but it fixed everything. I mean, Veronica felt so much better. And then not long after that, Veronica's family had something really hard. They had a tragedy in their family. And this friend, again, she makes homemade chili. And homemade chili, no matter what you're going through, it just fixes everything. You have some friends, don't you, that you're going through the worst thing, the most difficult thing, and then they'll send you a message, and their message is something like, sending prayers and good vibes your way. And when I get those messages, sending good vibes your way, I want to write back and just say, could you just send some homemade chili? How about just some chili? Forget about the good vibes. You can keep those. But how about showing up with some chili? Something like that. And my encouragement to you is to be that person who goes the extra mile, who makes a difference in your neighborhood and shows the love of Christ because you live in a kingdom of peace. You live in a reconciling kingdom. So Jesus, in this Sermon on the Mount, he talks about reconciling. He talks about the problem of anger and unforgiveness, and then he circles back. And he says, we all have difficult people in our lives. We all have people that we can't get along with. And then do you know what he asks us to do? He asks us to pray for them. Verse 44, he says, pray for those who persecute you. Pray for the most difficult people in your life. That's not an easy one. Living in a reconciling kingdom will be one of the hardest things that you do. And maybe right now, as I've been talking this morning, one or two people come to mind. And you thought, I've been at odds with them for years, for months. But maybe the Spirit of God is whispering right now to you, reconcile, heal. You can't go on. You live in a reconciling kingdom, so it's time. And so this morning, I want to ask you to pray for them. And that's what Jesus says. He says, pray for this person. And then go and reconcile. He'll help you do the hardest thing. And so sometimes at the Grove we do this, and I want to ask you to do this morning. If you can, you don't have to. But I want to invite you where you are to turn in your seat and kneel and pray. And pray for this person. Pray that God can bring healing in this relationship, in this friendship, maybe to someone who you love so deeply. So could all of us, could we turn? You don't have to, but if you would, let's get down on the floor and kneel before God and pray together as a people.